Okay. Now for pronation, you're going to start in the same position. You're still palpating that distal aspect of the ulna, the head and the styloid, and you're going to this time take your measurement from the dorsal aspect of the forearm, and you're going to align the goniometer, the axis of the goniometer, just proximal to that ulnar head. Again, keeping your stationary arm perpendicular to the floor. Now I'm going to have you turn your palm down. Good. Now I'm going to translate that goniometer upwards just a little bit so that the mobile arm can rest on the dorsal aspect of her forearm. And I'll take the measurement at about 85, 87 degrees. Okay, so for wrist extension, you want the forearm in neutral, patient sitting at a table comfortably with their elbow flexed. For extension, you want to assess the infill of that joint by putting pressure on the metacarpals, not with the fingers open. That's not going to work. The fingers have to be relaxed to avoid that insufficiency. So I'm going to go ahead and assess infill for extension as well as flexion. You okay? Mm-hmm. Putting that pressure again. So I've assessed infill. The first way that you can measure wrist extension is from this radial aspect. You want to palpate the radius and the snuff box. You're going to align the goniometer probably on that most proximal half of the snuff box. You want to keep your stationary arm, if you will, along the lateral aspect of the radius, and this mobile arm is going to rest along this lateral surface of the second metacarpal. Now I'm going to have you bend your wrist back. I'm kind of stabilizing that arm. And I will call that almost 70 degrees of wrist extension. Okay. Now she's going to go ahead and move into flexion. And I will measure her at 60 degrees, a little more, 65 degrees of wrist flexion. Okay. Now we're going to measure wrist flexion and extension a different way. Okay. Oh, yep, thank you. I'm going to put her elbow down on that pad for comfort, and this time you're going to do a skin surface measurement, and I'm going to say we've already, let's assess infill here for extension, infill for flexion. Okay, now you're going to be in neutral. You're going to place the goniometer on the volar aspect of the wrist, and now I'm going to ask you to stretch your hand back, and you're going to let the goniometer rest as flat as it can on her palm, with that one arm of the goniometer resting between these two fingers. And I'll take that measurement at 76 degrees of extension. Okay, now back to neutral. For flexion, it's another skin surface measurement. This time you place the goniometer on the dorsal aspect of the wrist and the mobile arm flat on the dorsum of the hand. Taking your measurement, I'll measure her at 82 degrees of wrist flexion right there. Okay, now we're going to measure radial deviation and ulnar deviation. And we're going to have her forearm pronated on the table, and you're going to palpate along that third metacarpal until you get to the head, and then you're going to find that depression just proximal to the third metacarpal, which is where the capitate should be residing. And in that depression is where you're going to line up the axis of the goniometer. You're going to keep that stable arm of the goniometer on the central aspect of her forearm, and you're going to keep this mobile arm aligned with her third metacarpal, not necessarily the digit, just the metacarpal. And I'm going to have her move into radial deviation. Okay. And I did not assess her infill. I'm going to go ahead and do that now by putting some pressure on this fifth metacarpal. Okay, now let's take that measurement, make sure I'm still aligned properly. Okay, now move into radial deviation. And I'm going to measure her at 30 degrees of radial deviation. That's quite a lot. And now let's go ahead and do ulnar. Let's see what your passive motion is for ulnar deviation. Okay. Now move into ulnar deviation again. About 34 degrees. Okay. Okay, we're going to measure radial abduction of the CMC joint. So I'm going to have her hand pronated on the table, her wrist, we just moved, her wrist relaxed on here. You want to palpate that snuff box distal to the radius. Oh, look, she's going to help me out there. You're going to put your goniometer, your axis in that snuff box, and your stationary arm is going to be aligned on this more, from this direction, I'll call it superior or dorsal aspect of the second metacarpal. Your mobile arm is going to line up on the metacarpal of the first digit or the thumb. Now I'm going to have her radially abduct, and I lost my positioning there. And her motion right there is about 47 degrees, making sure you're keeping your alignment on the metacarpals here. Okay, now we're going to measure palmar abduction. So you're going to have your patient's forearm in a neutral position. You're still palpating that snuff box again. Very, very nice. And you're going to put that axis of the goniometer in the snuff box again. This time you want to kind of appreciate that your stationary arm is lined up along the more lateral aspect of the second metacarpal. Your mobile arm is still lined up on the first metacarpal, and she's going to bring her thumb straight out in a palmar fashion from her hand. And this measurement is about 38, maybe 35 to 30, no, yeah, 40 degrees. Let's go right at 40 degrees for palmar abduction. Okay, now let's move on to the thumb MP joint, and I'm going to switch devices. I'm going to have her do extension first, and this, she almost has a little tiny bit of MP hyperextension. I could record that at about 7 degrees of hyperextension on this MP joint. Now I want you to, yes, flex that MP joint. This is a skin surface measurement, so you're not as concerned with the alignment of the axis of the goniometer. Is that as far as you can go? Good. Trying to take care that she's not opposing, she's not activating much CMC joint motion here. And this would be right at 62 degrees of flexion for the thumb MP joint. Now the IP joint, how much extension do you have there? Oh, she's got some hyperextension. You can do a skin surface measurement with this goniometer this way. It might give you a little bit of an exacerbated range, but consistency is key. If I do skin surface, I get about 44 degrees of hyperextension. You could use a different goniometer and do a lateral You could take a lateral measurement here of that IP for extension if you wanted to, but I typically do skin surface. So we did extension. Now I'm going to have you flex that IP joint on the skin surface again. Is that as far as you can go? Good. Oh. Say about 63 degrees of IP flexion. Now let's move to the other digits, and we're going to do, if we're doing MP flexion here, I'm going to have her make a fist. We're using this goniometer. Is it flat back there? Mm-hmm. We're on skin surface right here. So her index MP joint measures 94 degrees of flexion. And if you want to go ahead and measure extension of this MP joint, you can have her come up straight. I'm going to have to get over here so I can. She almost rests in 0 degrees. I'll turn the gun of extension, but I think I could, if you relax these IP joints. Let me check your. Oh, sorry. Got a little bit of, check that infill there. I'm going to have you keep these relaxed. Yeah, like that. And I'm going to measure hyperextension of, looks like it's about 18, 19 degrees, okay, on the MP joint. But now let's go to the PIP joint. We're going to measure flexion first. Let's go this way. Skin surface again, I can't see, what does that say?
110.
110 degrees. And extension, let's see what your extension is there. Ooh, she's got some hyperextension. If that joint was resting at 0, you might orient the goniometer this way, but you can see a little bit of hyperextension, so I orient it this way to catch, is that 25 degrees is what we're going to call her hyperextension of that PIP joint. I'm going to go ahead and catch DIP extension since she's up here. I think I would almost like to call that 0 degrees of extension. If she had hyperextension at that joint, again, you'd reverse the goniometer to catch that. I'm going to have you flex that DIP joint here so we can see where your flexion is. Like that is 72 degrees of flexion at the IP joint, DIP joint. And then you repeat that for middle ring and small finger.